So I appreciate Brannon has I'll let you explain the ministry that you have in many aspects and ways, and we're happy to have him come and talk about components of the religious Trojan horse. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. Let's pray. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning and for those that are assembled. It's been a short night. We had a wonderful day yesterday. We look forward to a wonderful day today as we gather together as believers, as Bereans who desire to understand the times and know how you would have us to respond. We know we are living in those days that are foretold in your word, and we are trying to warn, to watch, and we often warn and we watch while we also weep. We know that many in this room have taken hard stands. It has cost them. And we struggle between being an uncompromising prophetic voice that proclaims truth. We desire to be the weeping prophet over the condemning judge. We're often misunderstood. We're often questioned. Sometimes we're exiled because of the message. But we strive to keep that balance between proclaiming truth and being gracious and loving in our message. And I desire that today. For your honor, your glory alone. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. But it's good to be with you at the Pre-Trib conference. Tommy Ice is a very good friend of our family and has been in our home many times. As I mentioned to you last night, we are honored to produce his TV program. He's teaching through the book of Revelation right now, verse by verse. He'll be coming back to our TV studios in Memphis just very quickly to finish up. He said he's going to stay until he's done, so I think maybe by April we can let him go back home. And then he's going to start in on, I think, on Daniel, the book of Daniel. And we also produce the television ministry of Dr. Andy Woods. And he's done a great job on Signs of the Time. He finished up that series, and now he started in on Babylon in the Bible. And you can watch all of these at wvwtv.com. We have a free radio and TV app for your iPhone, your iPad, your Android. If you want to download that, you can find it at wvwtv.com/app. We also have a free Roku channel. Last time I checked, we had something like 25,000, 30,000 families that had taken and made that their channel on their home screen. It's amazing how we can see what they're doing and that they're liking the channel. We can't see who it is, but we can see. Yeah. Oh, no, we're not the NSA. Although we do have people with the NSA that follow our ministry. Really, seriously. We have folks that come from the NSA to our conference. I had a Worldview weekend rally all day Friday, all day Saturday in Memphis a few years ago. And they would pay, and why, I have no clue, but they would pay to hear me speak for 2 days. And in the room of about 60 people, there was an IRS agent, an FBI agent, and an NSA agent. And I thought I was about to be arrested and charged and audited, and all by all three of them. Turned out all three of them were friends, and all three of them we still know to this day, particularly the NSA agent. I keep that one real close. And but seriously, the NSA agent, the FBI agent, committed Christians. We have other guys who are in the intelligence community that follow what we do. We talk to regularly. And the point I'm making is that why do they follow us? Because they know that what we're saying is true. These guys have classified information. They often will point me to open source material, because obviously they can't share with me the other stuff. But they'll point to me to open source material. And we talk about so many interesting things that they want the public to know. And these are Christians, by the way. Can you imagine what is going to happen when the rapture occurs and all of these people in our military and NSA and FBI and different folks that are involved in protecting our country are gone? Our government's a mess, we know that, but there are many wonderful Christian people inside some of these agencies doing their very best. And one reason they follow us is because they realize what we're trying to do is have a comprehensive biblical worldview in the area of law and science and economics and history and family and social issues and theology and eschatology. What is the mission of the church? What is the purpose of the church? What is the role of the pastor? What is the purpose of Christians here and now? And we often get accused of being political when we're not being political, we're being biblical. We're simply saying this is what the Bible says about this issue. One of the issues that has been of great concern to us for a few years now has been, I don't even know if you guys are familiar with this, it's called the Club K cargo terminal, or Club K cargo box. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's a cargo terminal. A cargo box that you would bring into a cargo terminal. Like you'd see on the back of a flatbed semi going down the interstate, or the back of a rail car going on its way through your community, or on a ship coming in. It's a shipping container. And it's called the Club K container. But what is inside the Club K container? Inside the Club K container are 4 missile silos that launch 4 cruise missiles. And it's being manufactured in Russia. And the exporter of it is a 100% state-owned, Russian-owned company that exports it all over the world. Any terrorist group can get this. ISIS is bringing in $4 to $5 million a day between oil and extortion and kidnapping and drugs. Did you know? Just recently, Saddam Hussein's former chief nuclear scientist, Dr. Jaffer, was given a 35-year lease. His company, Gulftainer, given a 35-year lease to Port Canaveral in Florida. Saddam Hussein's former chief nuclear scientist, who was on the target list during Operation Iraqi Freedom. How many of you knew that? Can I see your hands? Well, you must be listening to our radio show, right? Well, we've been talking about the Club K container for a while, and then out comes a 91-page report by Ann Flanning and Alan Jones with Security Policy Center. Last week, we interviewed Claire Lopez, who used to be a CIA operations officer. And we discussed this in great detail. You'll find the TV show of this at WVW-TV. The week before that, we interviewed Phil Haney. Phil Haney is a Christian. Phil Haney is a former Department of Homeland Security officer who he was too good at his job. And he found himself under investigation with grand juries for 10 years for actually tracking down terrorists and terrorist cells in the United States of America. Phil Haney. He wrote the book, See Something, Say Nothing. And the subtitle is something like The Government's Compromise to the Jihadis. Just on Sunday night, we live stream on Sunday nights. We're live every day between 1 and 2 Central Time on the VCY America Network. Then we pre-record most of our TV shows, but on Sunday night, we go live from 8 to 9 Central, and you can watch it free of charge at wvwtv.com/briefing. And we live stream, and so you can watch it on Roku and apps and your website and iPhone, iPad, Android, all that. And so we interviewed Phil Haney the other night for our TV show. This week we interviewed Claire Lopez, as I said, former CIA officer, operations officer on the Club K container. Sunday night here in this hotel, we set up our studio to interview many of you in this room today. And Sunday night we had former FBI agent, counterterrorism expert John Guandolo with us, who's been doing a lot with us, and we produce his radio show, distribute his radio show. And he and his friend, his partner in this work of theirs, Chris Govitz, are out tracking down and trying to expose Muslim Brotherhood in America. Muslim Brotherhood is nothing more than a front group for many other groups. Muslim Brotherhood has many front groups. Islamic Society of North America, the Muslim Youth Student Association. By the way, Muslim Student Association is on 700 college campuses in America, and they have their Hitler Week every week. Muslim Student Association with their Hitler Week. And John Guandolo, Chris Gobbets are working to try to warn law enforcement around the country. And you know what their biggest problem is? The same problem we're having. We go into communities and rent hotel ballrooms. Oh, by the way, you can forget getting into churches. That's something we learned a long time ago. You can forget renting a church. They are not going to have you. My father-in-law is an architect that built a church in northern Illinois. Built the thing, remodeled the thing, donated all his time. My wife's grandparents were charter members. And we held our Worldview Weekend there at that church for many years. And many of the people, some of them professionals, doctors, attorneys, loved what we were doing. But then the pastors and the church staff got all wobbly in the knees because we dared to say some of the things we're going to say here today. They thought the people we had were just a little too extreme. Like, really? Erwin Lutzer from historic Moody Church is a little extreme? Come on. This is a church that my father-in-law built for free. His parents were charter members of the church. They started it. And their granddaughter's husband can't even use it for a free biblical worldview weekend, saying the very things you guys are saying here. And we started finding that all over the country. And so we started going to hotel ballrooms and spending $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000 for a hotel ballroom. Ask Tommy how much these ballrooms cost. Tommy says he doesn't know? Oh, well. Well, I know. And now guess what they're doing to us at the hotel ballrooms? Last April, I was speaking in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I had Shahram Hadian with me, a former Muslim, Shahram Hadian from Iran. His family left Iran right before, 6 weeks before the fall of the Shah. His father was high-ranking military. He said, it's time to get the family out. His father was a Muslim. He was a beer-drinking, pork-eating Muslim. Pretty moderate, wouldn't you say? And he saw what was happening. He's like, we got to get out of here. And so 6 weeks before the fall of the Shah, they get out. Shahram Hadian is a coach. He grows up and he becomes a coach. And a high school student, young lady, starts sharing the gospel with him. And he didn't like it. But she didn't back down. She kept sharing the gospel with her coach. High school student, 16 years old. She finally said, you need to meet with a man that I know. And Shahram agreed to go to breakfast with him. And eventually he heard and understood the truth of the gospel. Today Shahram is a pastor. He ran for governor in Washington State a few years ago. And he's one of our broadcasters. We gave him a TV program. And what we do is we look for guys that are like Andy Woods and Tommy Ice and Mike Gendron and Shahram Hadian and we have a guy named Usama Dakdok who was born and raised in Egypt, and his daddy's planted churches all over Egypt. And guess who has burned down their churches and destroyed their churches? Muslim Brotherhood. Excuse me, the NSA calling. Muslim Brotherhood burning down their churches in Egypt. And so Usama is a guy who has a TV show with us. See, we find these folks that have a diverse worldview. We found one guy who was with the military as a meteorologist, who's an expert on global warming. His name is Charles Clough. He sits right there. And we do a lot with him. You see, we're looking for people who have a biblical worldview for all areas of life. But you know what? Many in the church say this is politics. This is controversial. This is too harsh. This is over the top. This is conspiratorial. I was reading an article about Claire Lopez the other night, who's not religious per her definition. Of course, we know everyone has a religion. A religion is a system set or collection of beliefs. Everyone has a religion. But she would say she's, basically whatever. She's nothing to her. But yet, you go read articles about her, and the left and other people say, oh, she's a conspiratorialist. No, she's a former CIA operations officer, for Pete's sake. Anyone that speaks truth today, they throw a pejorative on you. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're an Islamophobic, which, by the way, that term was developed in the early 1990s by the International Institute of Islamic Thought, a front group for Muslim Brotherhood. And so now when you speak truth, you're an Islamophobic. But guess what? Now we have so-called evangelicals saying, you're a conspiracy theorist. He's an Islamophobic. And now we see the information operation that has been carried out on America through media and education for years. And who has now picked up the talking points? The evangelical world. You write a book on Bible prophecy, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're over the top. You're doom and gloom. You're a fearmonger. So back to the Club K cargo container. You thought I'd forgotten, didn't you? We go on a lot of rabbit trails, but they always come back. So our government lets a contract go to Dr. Jaffer, Saddam Hussein's former chief scientist, nuclear scientist. Oh, by the way, he was able to miniaturize a nuclear weapon. It's called the beach ball, because it looks like a beach ball. He's been working with North Korea for a long time, Dr. Jaffer. Oh, I forgot. Dr. Jaffer was actually also mentored since the 80s by a Russian KGB general, Primakov, known as the Bear in the Desert. Oh, and by the way, when the Soviet Union supposedly collapsed in 91 and perestroika came in, former KGB agents here in the U.S. who are now our friends and warning and saying, don't you trust the Russians. One of them is in Maryland, and I interviewed him, and he was talking about being a former KGB agent, why he's in America now, why we can't trust the Russians, why they're not your friend. And he was talking about the man that you guys have seen on the pictures with the bald head in the hospital bed who's dying because someone likely Putin, had one of his people put plutonium in his tea, right? What was he doing? He was exposing Putin and what Putin was doing with Russia and behind the scenes and acting as though he's fighting the terrorists when in reality they're funding and training the terrorists through the Kremlin. Some of the biggest jihadis in the world. And this guy was spilling the beans and went to have a little bite to eat with someone and some tea, and when he went up and go to the bathroom or wasn't looking or whatever, some plutonium was slipped in his tea and he drank it, and we all see his bald head as he lays there in the hospital bed dying. And this former KGB agent I was interviewing a few years ago who's now in Maryland, I said, did you know him? He said, oh yes, he was one of my closest friends. I said, you're saying the same things he was saying. Aren't you worried? He said, I will not be going to have tea with any Russians anytime soon. But here we have this general, this bear in the desert, General Primakov, who's been mentoring since the early 80s a Dr. Jaffer, who becomes Saddam Hussein's nuclear scientist, who our country allows a 35-year lease to go through for the cargo terminal Port Canaveral in Florida, which has lots of military bases right there. Oh, and by the way, Dr. Jaffer's company, Gulf Tainer, is in a relationship with the 100% Russian state-owned exporter of the Club K missile launching cargo system. Oh, and by the way, since 2015, the Russian Defense Journal has bragged about these and placing them around the world and on riverboats, barges, trains, semi-trucks, and they have talked openly about placing them around even the United States of America, and experts are saying this is an asymmetrical war, and Russia now has the advantage. Oh, and by the way, you ever heard of the problems going on in Venezuela with their economic problem because socialism just is so wonderful and it works, right? I mean, look at Venezuela, it's great. I mean, the middle class are eating out of dumpsters down there. It's wonderful. Socialism works, right? Wrong. The middle class literally eating out of dumpsters. They've got a massive financial crisis. Hugo Chavez is gone, neo-Marxist. They got themselves a new socialist, Marxist. They're in financial trouble, and they happen to own a petroleum company. Anybody know what the name of the petroleum company for? Citgo. Yeah. And so they're in financial trouble. So along comes Russia and says, you need some cash? You need some money? And they loan them several $billions. And according to Reuters and all kinds of other reports you'll find, Russia now has about a 50% stake in Citgo. Just thousands of gas stations around the country, but those are independently owned, so that's not such a big deal. But you do know what they own, other than having these independent gas stations? They own 3 oil refineries and 48 oil terminals. You got oil refinery in Louisiana, oil refinery in Texas, and an oil refinery in northern Illinois. Now, you guys know how big an oil refinery is, right? You think it would be hard for Russia, who now has a 50% stake in these companies, to bring in through their buddy, Dr. Jaffer, who's been mentored since the early 80s by a general KGB officer known as the Bear in the Desert, to work with the state-owned exporter of the Club K missile system, bring it into the U.S. and plop it down at one of these oil refiners? Or how about one of the 48 oil terminals up and down the eastern seaboard? Go look at all the oil terminals up and down the eastern seaboard owned by Citgo. So how did this happen? The government agency, CFIUS, that's supposed to review these things, well, according to our friend Jim Rickards, he tweeted out in October of this year that James R. Clapper shut down the advisory board that's supposed to review these things to make sure there's not a national security problem. And when he shut that down, uranium-1 went through, giving a percentage of our uranium to Russia, which seemed to benefit a lot of people, including the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation. And everybody's talking about that because of the Clinton connection. But guess what? That's also when the Gulf Tanner deal went through. Who's talking about that? Nobody, other than a few of us. And yet Phil Haney and Claire Lopez, again, Phil Haney, former officer with the Department of Homeland Security, Claire Lopez, former CIA operations officer, says this is a clear and present danger to the United States of America now. What happened with uranium-1? Bad. But it's not the existential threat, the clear and present danger that the Gulf Tanner deal and the Club K cargo missile system is right here now. And who's talking about it? Oh, by the way, Northcom and NORAD has said they have no way of tracking these things if they're in the U.S. Oh, and they can lay dormant for 10 years and then get commands from a satellite. The top opens up and you can see on YouTube, not only computer simulated, you can actually see the real thing. In our news program this week at wvwtv.com, you'll see where we've embedded in the broadcast the actual footage of one of these containers opening up, and there are the 4 silos that can shoot these cruise missiles, and they can be opened up and given their coordinates from satellites, and they can lay dormant for 10 years. Now, you're starting to wonder why America may not be listed in the last days. We've become a nation of fools. Romans 1, vain, useless, futile in their thinking. That's what it means by nation of fools. And now that we have a nation of fools, we have a church leadership that are simpletons. And whenever you go and speak about something that doesn't please people, and they can't refute the truth of what you're saying, they simply go after and start attacking your character. Oh, he's a fearmonger. He's over the top. He's a conspiracy theorist. He's doom and gloom. See, they can't debate the facts. So they just go after your character. Just like the liberals. And who's doing this? Leading evangelicals today. Empty suit simpletons who are getting their information from the fools of the world.
Preach.
And yet you and I are the ones that are considered to be the problem. Why? Because we're seeking to have a comprehensive biblical worldview for law, science, economics, history, family, social issues, and religion. Oh, by the way, Dr. Jaffer's mentor, the KGB officer, Primakov, he organized the Islamic bloc after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which perestroika, experts now say, that was all a ruse. That was a ruse. Let America think they've won the Cold War. Let America let down their guard. Let America stop paying attention to us. And while America thought the Cold War is over, Primakov, General Primakov, known as the Bear in the Desert, and this is why he's called the Bear in the Desert, begins to put together an Islamic bloc of nations to start the war on terror. And America has spent countless dollars and lots of national treasure in our sons and daughters fighting the war on terror, funded and many of them trained through the Kremlin, overseen by Putin, keeping us distracted while he builds up his military and state-of-the-art equipment and submarines, and is building his alliance. And isn't it interesting that many of those alliances that he's built right now are the same alliances you see in Ezekiel 38 and 39? How much of the church knows what I just told you? How much of the church thinks national security is a biblical issue? Romans 13 says the purpose of government is to reward the righteous and punish the wicked, to keep a stable and just society so the governments that God created, family government, civil government, church government, can work in cooperation with each other, each of them having their own sphere. The church is not to be the government, and the government is not to be the church. The problem is many evangelicals have confused what is the goal and purpose of the church, and it is not to be the government. I'm not interested in a theocracy. Stable and just society so these spheres can work in concert together. These are all biblical issues. And we have people in our congregations that get up every day and go to these jobs with a biblical worldview and a commitment to carrying out the purpose of government. And so many of them listen to our broadcasts. Because while the simpletons in the pulpit, the pansies in the pulpit, think that what we're saying is over the top and conspiratorial, the people who are in national intelligence who have security clearances know what we're saying is true. And not only that, some of them are funneling us open source material. Why? Because they want us reporting it. Why? Because they're Christians and they want the church to know what's coming. And if you say, oh, by the way, you might want to put away a little bit, have an emergency plan, so that if one of these Club K missile systems is launched, your family is not sitting in the dark, well then now all of a sudden they're going to make fun of you for actually recommending you have a quality, reasonable, balanced family emergency plan. Which, by the way, the FEMA director just came out in front of the White House last month and a half ago, in front of the White House, in front of the West Wing, and said, as the FEMA director, we need a culture of preparedness. He said, I can't understand why the American people are not concerned about what's happening and being prepared. Other government agencies are saying, if something happens, don't expect the government to be the cavalry to come save you. You will not. Oh, and these Club K missile systems, not only could they be launched by satellites, and there are 2 satellites circling the globe several times a day coming over the United States of America, owned by North Korea. How many of you knew that? How many of you knew there are satellites, 2 of them, going over the U.S. every day, several times a day from North Korea? How many of you knew that? Okay, a few of you. One of our broadcasters is a guy by the name of Dr. Peter Pry. See, what we do is we bring in the biblical guys like Andy Woods and Tommy Ice and Charles Clough and some of these other folks, and we do biblical programs. But then we bring in guys, and we don't really know where they're coming from, spiritually or theologically. Some of them we do, and what we tell them is this: we want you to have a news program, don't you dare talk about theology. And we tell them point blank, we're not going to be involved in interfaith dialogue, we're not going to be ecumenical. You know, we're bringing you in to discuss national security. Stay in this lane. If you stay in this lane, we'll give you a program, produce your radio show, TV show, you know, do a lot of things to promote the organization you're working with now, but you stay in this lane. And if they can agree to that, we give them a program. But we advertise that as a news program. One of them is Dr. Peter Pry. Dr. Peter Pry, you put his name, P-R-Y, into a search engine, you'll see him all over YouTube. Dr. Peter Pry is the former chief of staff of the EMP Commission for Congress. Electromagnetic Pulse. EMP Commission for Congress. Chief of staff. Former chief of staff. Why? Because the simpletons on Capitol Hill just shut down the EMP Commission at a time when North Korea is saying they're building an EMP weapon. By the way, the 2,800-mile missile they just shot off, intercontinental ballistic missile they just shot off last week, do you notice the trajectory? Straight up. Virtually straight up. You know how much power that takes to go straight up versus at an arc? 2,800 miles, 10 times higher than the International Space Station, it said. Peter Pry has been on our program now for a couple years warning and telling people, and we gave him his own radio show at worldviewradio.com. And he has been warning and warning and warning about the great threat of EMP. So what do you think these club cargo containers that could be, we don't know, but could be positioned around the country, if not, could be brought in on cargo ships and shot off from international waters, which, by the way, I have friends of mine that are with the government, that are with the military, that are rocket scientists, literal rocket scientists. I interviewed the Assistant Director of Operations for NORAD, former Assistant Director of Operations for NORAD, General Cash, a few years ago, when somebody shot a missile off the West Coast a few years ago going out to sea. Remember that? He thought it was likely a Chinese sub sending us a message, which they, by the way, had gotten through all of our electronic nets to get up that close to our shore. Now that's pretty freaky. And I said, do we have the missile system to shoot that thing down? I asked another friend of mine, do we have the missile system to shoot that down? Well, it depends on who you ask. Some say, yeah, but what they really mean is maybe. Others say, no, we don't. So the reality is we do have some things, obviously there's some of them they can't talk about, but they have some things on East and West Coast that they hope could maybe help shoot something down, but when it comes in that close, they don't have a lot of time to work with. Something coming from North Korea, they got some time. They got about a 60% success rate right now. But coming in close on our shores, off of a cargo ship on either coast, very limited time to respond to anything. And so the enemies are already saying, inside, from railroad cars, semi-trucks, riverboats, EMP, cruise missiles, cargo launchers, on the West Coast, East Coast, fishing ships, cargo container ships. By the way, Iran has been practicing since about 1998, shooting a missile off of a fishing boat. And if they were to get it up high enough over the atmosphere, you'd have an electromagnetic pulse, which would grab the curvature of the earth and fry the entire grid. Again, maybe this is why America's not in the last days. Maybe it's because America's been turned over, Romans 1. So as we try to bring a biblical worldview to all these things and understand all these things, we have to understand the importance of not just being full of talk. We have a lot of religious professionals in what I like to call the religious industrial complex, that all they do is talk. Talk, talk, talk. Theological talk, theological talk, theological talk. They have a lot of great orthodoxy, but no orthopraxy. You notice that? A lot of orthodoxy, and their orthodoxy is good, some of them, really good. But if they had to live in the real world, they'd starve to death. They can't make their own theological orthodoxy work out in their own colleges and seminaries. Their own colleges and seminaries got the problems that are doing the very things they say they oppose. Why? Because they should have never started a college or seminary. They should have stayed a pastor. You know what I'm saying? And now they can't even run these gigantic organizations with what they say from the pulpit. They got great orthodoxy, but they can't do the orthopraxy. And as soon as we apply a biblical worldview with our orthodoxy to have orthopraxy, they think we're being political. They think we're being fearmongers. They think we're just simply trying to sell another book. See, the problem is we don't even have many pastors today that actually have a comprehensive biblical worldview. And you wonder why we have so many parachurch ministries today. If the church were doing its job, we wouldn't need parachurch ministries. Now, this isn't to say we don't have good shepherds who get it. We do. But you and I know that's the minority, and most of those guys are looked down on by the religious industrial complex. And don't you dare put out a book that actually starts naming names, or no publisher will want to publish it. And so When we try to apply a biblical worldview to all these law, science, economics, history, family, social issues, we find quickly our greatest opposition is not from the globalist, not necessarily even from the Islamicists, but from the religious industrial complex. Yeah, we're getting blowback from the Islamicists. In April of this year in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Shahram Hadi and I were speaking. Remember, he's the former Iranian Muslim who's now a Christian pastor exposing Islam. We're in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, hotel ballroom, about 500 people, standing room only, people sitting on the floor, sitting on the back counters at the back of the room. Shahram spoke, then I spoke. We had to hire 4 off-duty police officers because even though we'd been to Sioux Falls many, many times, no one had said a word about, us being there in 20 years. We'd just come and go and have great turnouts and nothing. Been doing this since 1993. We've really never had any problems other than from the religious community. Seriously. But a lady by the name of, her last name Muslim, last name Islam. Kind of like when I went into the cafe the other day to my town to get a sandwich. And I ordered the sandwich, and I looked at the guy's name tag as he handed me the tuna fish sandwich, and his name tag, and his name was, are you ready for this? His name was Jihad. I'm thinking, wow, this might be the last tuna sandwich I eat. But this woman's last name is Islam, and she's an immigration attorney, and she's bringing in all these immigrants, Muslim immigrants, and Sioux Falls has become a dumping ground for the United Nations and for the government. And the United Nations is behind a lot of these immigrants being brought in here to America. I don't have time to get into all that, but they are. And the Obama administration had over $1 billion to fund all these religious organizations who are getting money to bring in. So now all these religious organizations are all for, well, what would Jesus do? Jesus was an immigrant, says Russell Moore of the, the Religious Ethics Committee? Ethics Religious Liberty Commission, something like that, ERLC, Southern Baptist. Jesus was an immigrant, he says on C-SPAN, Russell Moore, who's called himself a communitarian, which we'll get into in a minute. And so you got all these groups getting big money, follow the money, right? So they're getting billion dollars to bring all these immigrants, and you wonder why they're, this is what Jesus did. Oh, you're not a good Christian. Why? Because you want to vet people and you believe in national security and you believe in Romans 13, the purpose of the government is reward the righteous and punish the wicked, keep a stable and just society so the family and church can do what their job is to do. So she's part of this immigration system, last name Islam, she's an immigration attorney, and so she hears we're coming to town. And she's holding some kind of conference, and the media's there. And she says, yes, see, we got these problems, like this guy Howse and Hadi are coming to town, and they're hate speech. And the media's like, Howse and Hadi, and who are they? So now the media wakes up to Howse and Hadi, and the next thing you know, there's a big article in the paper, the Argus Leader, that Tennessee-based radio host and Washington State pastor, they're both coming to town for their anti-Muslim conference. Shahram Hadian's dad was a pork-eating, beer-drinking Muslim. It's not an anti-Muslim conference. It's a biblical worldview weekend rally. Free. Not even charging. So the Sioux Falls Islamic Center pulls a permit to protest. So the police call me and tell me that they're going to have some protesters, so we hired 4 off-duty police officers just to be safe. We get there to set up, gets underway, all the news media are there filming, and you got a line they put up for the protesters to stay back, but they're all there in their uniforms, you know what I mean. And their signs, preach, love, not hate, and all this stuff. The Sioux Falls Islamic Center which, by the way, we went and looked them up, and their taxes are paid by the North American Islamic Trust, NATE. NATE is a front group for Muslim Brotherhood. You guys do know that Muslim Brotherhood was founded in the early 1900s by a guy named Al-Banna, and Al-Banna, working with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Al-Husseini, helped to orchestrate the final solution. You know that, right? You see the pictures of Al-Husseini sitting there going over plans for Auschwitz. And, of course, he is said to have been visiting the death camps, making sure, speed it up. And it's reports from some experts that Hitler was going to let many of the Jews out of Hungary and Bulgaria leave. And the Mufti said, no, they'll go back. They'll go to Jerusalem. They'll go to Palestine. I don't want them there. Kill them. Including about 4,000 kids that were ready to be allowed to leave. He stopped it, and those 4,000 kids, it said, were murdered. This is Muslim Brotherhood. They're translating Mein Kampf into Arabic. It's still selling them. PLO just continues to distribute Mein Kampf. This is Muslim Brotherhood. NATE is a front group for Muslim Brotherhood. So they show up to protest us. So we have 4 off-duty police officers. It's a room that looks just like this. In fact, the layout's just like this. The back doors are at the back. My wife is back there with my son. The resource table. Shram spoke, then I spoke. And then all of a sudden, while I'm speaking, I noticed these cops coming into the room. Now that happened to me once in Katy, Texas, where all of a sudden cops started coming into the side of the room. And I later found out that someone had written on the bathroom wall, Brannon Howse must die, while I was speaking. That's probably the nicest thing's ever been written on a bathroom wall about me, but I had that same eerie feeling when cops start coming off to the side of the room. And I thought, something is up. So as I stepped off the platform, one of them met me, and we went out a door that was right there. He said, we have a little issue. I said, yes. He said, a guy just came in here, and we've removed him from the premises. But he had a Quran and 2 guns. And I said, whoa. And one of the other officers said, yeah, we know who he is. He lives in town. He's been here a long time. He told us who he is. He has a Facebook page. And he's already posted the video of what he did right here on his own Facebook page. He stood in the back of the room, Facebook Lived his Quran, then panned the crowd while I was speaking. You can hear my voice. You then hear this off-duty officer come up to him and ask him, no filming, because we'd already announced, no filming. And he says, I'm leaving. And so he starts to leave, and he follows him out, and he says, do you have weapons on you? He said, of course I do. Well, that's legal in South Dakota, as it is here, Texas as well. He said, what's your name? He said, something like Joe Smith the Muslim, John Smith the Muslim. They said, well, you're going to have to leave. He goes out to his car where he proceeds to make another Facebook Live video that we then had, where he says, you want to be afraid? Be afraid. Pulls out his pistol from his side. Be afraid. Then he reaches back behind him, pulls out a semi-automatic rifle. Be terrified. And he's using the A, B, C, D, E, F, 6th letter of the alphabet over and over, cursing up a storm. Shows 5 weapons, 2 semi-automatic, and then shows 1,200 rounds that he admitted to on Facebook. Be afraid, be terrified, be afraid, be terrified. Shows our motor coach, films our motor coach. We had to be escorted out of town that night by officers following us to make sure we got down the interstate far enough and then find some Walmart in the middle of southern Minnesota to camp out before we went to the next city in La Crosse. We're on a 5-night tour. The next night we showed up in La Crosse, Wisconsin. We had 4 or 5 squad cars surrounding the building because the local police were that concerned. Took us 12 days to get the man charged, even though the terroristic threat was on video. Why? Because the Muslims have been dumped into Sioux Falls so great that the media is running the game and the cops and the pastors are afraid. Do you think one pastor came to our defense? Not but one. One. We had a state representative, a state senator in the room that night. They got on the phone with the Attorney General. One of them literally got into a yelling match on a few phone conversations with the Attorney General. Why are you not charging this guy with a terroristic threat? He was sentenced about a month ago in federal. Got 7 months. Threaten a Christian today with semi-automatics? 7 months. Don't do that again. You think that had been a guy with a southern accent with a Confederate flag flying from the back of his pickup truck? They would have put him not in jail, they would put him under the jail. But what did the religious community say? Nothing. Other than our followers, nothing. Why? Because they don't have a comprehensive biblical worldview. They don't understand the 6 worldviews. There are more than 6, but there are 6 dominant worldviews ruling the world. Islam, one of them. Oh, and by the way, the Club K container, one of the guys who was part of the government agency that was shut down and put on inside that organization, a guy named Nabi Amir, connected to Muslim Brotherhood. See, the Muslim Brotherhood have dominated our agencies, our government. These are all religious issues. You see, we have a religious Trojan horse. We have a religious Trojan horse. Jude 3 warns about men who've risen from within. 2 Peter warns of the same thing. And we have people that have risen from within, evangelicalism, that when we try to warn the church about what's coming and that this is smelling an awful lot like the 1930s in Germany, and we had better awaken the American Christians and the American Jews to understand what's coming, the people who have risen from within shout us down. Oh, Howse, he's divisive. You're right. There must be divisions among you to know who is approved of God. Romans 16:17, mark those who cause divisions and offensive contrary to doctrine. Who's causing the division? Me? You? No, the people that are contradicting the scriptures. Here's Julian Huxley, the first director of UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific, Cultural Organization. By the way, Trump just defunded UNESCO. At the moment, 2 opposing philosophies of life confront each other. You may categorize the 2 philosophies as 2 supernationalism, or as individualism versus collectivism, or as capitalism versus communism, or Christianity versus Marxism. Can these opposites be reconciled? This antithesis be resolved in a higher synthesis? I believe not only that this can happen, but that through the inexorable dialect of evolution, it can and must happen. What's he talking about? Fight, fight, fight. Thesis and antithesis. Idea, opposite idea. They must fight and converge and merge. So what's that mean? You have to put people inside the church, inside evangelicalism, being the antithesis to cause the conflict, for the change comes from the conflict. This is Saul Alinsky. This is George Hagel. And who do we have inside evangelicalism today? People that sound just like liberals, just like globalists and liberals, inside evangelicalism, running some of our biggest organizations and working with some of our biggest church denominations, causing the conflict. I'm not causing it. You're not causing it. They're causing it. They've risen from within. Dr. Robert Klink said this in this movement, the seeker-sensitive church movement: it's imperative that unbelievers are brought into the church, otherwise the process of continual change cannot begin. There must be an antithesis, unbelievers, present to oppose the thesis, believers, in order to move towards consensus, compromise, and move the believers away from their moral absolutism, resistance to change. If all members of the church stand firm on the Word of God and His final authority in all doctrine and tradition, then the church cannot and will not change. This is common faith. Soon we will see why these change agents are pushing so hard for change to occur in the church. And we have change agents in the church today. And these change agents have convinced other people, do not speak up when the persecution from the Marxists and the Muslims comes against people proclaiming truth. They got what they deserved. They're intolerant, narrow-minded, hate mongers, conspiracy theorists. They got it. They deserve it. That's what the change agents are telling your evangelical leaders. That's not what Jesus would have done. What, you mean come to town and hold a biblical worldview weekend with a former Muslim saying, we don't share a common faith with Muslims? Allah and God are not the same? Oh, and by the way, when the Muslims did this to us in Sioux Falls, guess what happened? See, we already had a hard time renting churches because all they see is what we're talking about. Oh, well, you can't touch that, you know. So hotel ballrooms are glad to take our money until that happened in Sioux Falls and made literally international news. Daily Mail, Jerusalem Post, CBS Los Angeles, on and on and on. Just type in Muslim man brings weapons to Christian conference. You'll see the videos he made. So now they type in worldview weekend. You want to rent our building? Worldview. And they send me a contract Here's the date. It's available. Here's the price. Yes, we'll pay that. I go to sign the contract, send it back. In the meantime, they've gone and researched who we are. Then they call back and say, you know what? This isn't a real good fit for us. So guess what? Now we're having a hard time hosting our own biblical worldview weekends. Not in churches. Can't really do that. The churches that will have us will hold maybe 200 people. The small little remnant church will hold 200 people. Well, we're having 500 to 1,800 people show up. Can't do that at a church of 200. So it's not that we don't have some churches, but they're the small little remnant faithful church, and their churches auditorium too small. The bigger churches, well, they've already compromised most of them. That's how they got to be big. Now we go to hotel ballrooms. Guess what? Well, we can't do that because the Islamic Society of North America and Muslim Brotherhood and all these groups agitated, created a conflict. Now it's all over the internet. Find out who we are. Now the hotel ballrooms are scared of us. So we can only find a few hotels we've worked with for years that will agree to even let us come back anymore. So what is happening? Religious freedom, freedom of speech, going down the drain. And where's the Christian pastor saying, no, we have a right of freedom of speech and freedom of religion to rent a hotel ballroom. And increasingly, you will find it hard to even hold these events in a public facility. You see, there are many components of the religious Trojan horse. The Hegelian dialectic process, what we just talked about, thesis and antithesis, idea, opposite idea, Fabian socialism, communitarianism. I think most of us know what Fabian socialism is. Started in London in the mid-1800s. The idea of socialism by evolution, not revolution, over time. The Fabian Society gave birth to the Labour Party. The Labour Party would be Tony Blair. Tony Blair's running the Tony Blair Faith Foundation that seeks to bring all the religions of the world together as one. On the advisory board of the Tony Blair Faith Foundation is, wait for it, Rick Warren, who brought Tony Blair to his church and gave him an award. Communitarianism. Socialism and capitalism is merging. That's communitarianism. Socialism and capitalism merge. Communitarianism. If you don't belong, which is what the Fabians do, but if you don't belong to the Fabian Socialist Society, we really can't call you a Fabian. So what we call you is a communitarian. Russell Moore has bragged he's a communitarian. Rick Warren was mentored by a guy named Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker bragged he was a communitarian. Peter Drucker also bragged that one of the greatest philosophers of the day was Soren Kierkegaard. Existentialism, subjective truth. Peter Drucker also bragged not only that he was a communitarian and that he loved Soren Kierkegaard, he also bragged that he loved the economist John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes, Fabian socialist. John Maynard Keynes said we can steal the majority of the people's wealth by a constant inflation of the currency and not one man in a million will know what we're doing. Oh, and what is the goal of Fabian socialism? Using religion for world government. What is Tony Blair doing from the Labour Party that was birthed out of the Fabian Socialist Society? Bringing the Tony Blair Foundation to the table to bring all the world's religions together. Where do you think that's going? Socialism by evolution, not revolution, global government. And now we have the communitarian church growth movement. They've risen from within. Now the change agents have come from within to say, this is how you do church. This is the purpose of the church. This is the role of the pastor. The pastor is now a community organizer, and his church is a community organization. And the goal is no longer the Great Commission, it's social justice. And building the kingdom of God on earth. Taking the invisible kingdom and making it visible. And who do you have teaching this? John Piper. John Piper. Tim Keller and a lot of these other neo-Calvinists. Oh, but don't let John Piper's foolishness be an obstacle. Don't let John Piper interviewing Rick Warren in what he called a 90-minute appreciative interview. Who could be opposed to the purpose-driven life? Says John Piper to Rick Warren. Who can be opposed to the peace plan? Look at the peace plan, Rick. It's wonderful. He brings Rick Warren to his conference via video screen. John Piper just came to Memphis in 2014 with some other social justice warriors. David Platt, Matt Chandler. Matt Chandler, by the way, is writing on white privilege and how we better understand our whiteness. I understand my whiteness. Every morning I look at it and think, ugh. I need some tan. Do these people not understand we're of one blood? Acts 17:11. There's no such thing as races. There's one race. There are different people groups. There's only one race, the human race. And so now the agitators, the liberals, John Piper, folks, is a theological and a social liberal. Well, he may be pro-life, but don't mistake, he is a liberal. He came to Memphis, where I live, in 2014, along with these other guys, and started bemoaning what happened in Ferguson and why they were so sad the cop wasn't indicted. Hello, when a guy climbs into your car, grabs your gun, and it goes off in your squad car, that is a threat to your life. And if the guy ends up dead, he just committed suicide. And they want him indicted. They don't have a clue what they're doing. In 1961, there was a guy by the name of Sullivan. He was the assistant director of the FBI. And he gave a speech at the United Methodist Church in Parkland. Not too far from here, right? Dallas, Texas. United Methodist Church, Parkland, right here. In 1961, the assistant director of the FBI, Sullivan, gives a speech. And you know what he said? He said, we got a problem. And the problem is we have a lot of pastors and clergy running around being co-opted by the communist worldview. And they don't even know it. They're being co-opted by the communist worldview, and they don't even know it. And he said, you know what, there's another problem? They go out there and they start talking about things that they have no business talking about because they have no understanding of the topic. And they just spew their ignorance. And he said, don't be fooled. The communists are trying to co-opt your pastors and clergy. Well, of course they are. This is exactly the goal that they've set out years and years ago. And it's given us the communitarian church growth movement. Socialism mixed with capitalism, social justice, and guys running around promoting dominion theology, build the kingdom of God on earth, social justice, redistribution of wealth. Now we have globalism, private-public partner relationships with the government. That's what Rick Warren promotes, the three-legged stool that he learned from Peter Drucker. The government, business, and the social sector. Government, business, and churches. Or government, businesses, and houses of worship. And he's at the Clinton Global Initiative a few years ago talking with a Muslim, Abu Patel, on video talking about how we'll use all these faith centers to defeat the 5 global giants. Poverty and lack of education. Where's the gospel, Rick? Where's the gospel? Amen. Don't be fooled. These people know how to use religion. Neo-evangelicals make up this religious Trojan horse. Pagan spirituality, occultism, radical environmentalism, tolerance, pluralism, religious syncretism, spiritual evolution, Darwinian evolution, social justice, social gospel, dominion theology, the new apostolic reformation with their false prophets and apostles, masking terms, manifested sons of God, these new apostolic guys running around thinking they're going to become so evolved they'll be sinless, raising the dead, running and ruling the church, pragmatism, patriotic ecumenicalism, we'll work with anybody just to save the country. That's what this patriotic ecumenicalism is. Twisting and distorting the Word of God, lack of biblical discernment, false teachers, and then you add in the United Nations, Church of Rome. These are these components. Now, before my time gets away, let me give you some interesting quotes. George Bernard Shaw said, I as a socialist, have had to preach as much as anyone the enormous power of the environment. We can change it. We must change it. There is absolutely no other sense in life than the task of changing it. What is the use of writing plays? What is the use of writing anything if there's not a will which finally molds chaos itself into a race of gods? Gods on earth, folks. Fabian socialist H.G. Wells said, this is my religion. The way of salvation, the political work of the open conspiracy must weaken, efface, incorporate, or supersede existing governments. The character of the open conspiracy will now be plainly displayed. It will be a world religion. Does the Bible say there'll be a world religion? A one world economy, a one world government, a one world religion? And make no mistake about it, folks, I believe the one world
false dominant church will be the one that lays the foundation for the one world economy and one world government. The church will be, the false church will be the vehicle to get all this into place. So here we have the Fabian window created by George Bernard Shaw in 1910, stolen in 1978, and then it reappeared in 2005. And it was put on display at the London School of Economics, which is the Fabian School. By the way, you know who else is a graduate of the London School of Economics, the Fabian School? George Soros. Here's the Fabian window. How many of you have ever seen the Fabian window? Can I see your hands? How many of you have never seen the Fabian window? Raise your hand. Okay, I love that, because now I'm teaching something you don't know, because there's a room full of smart people. Now I found something you don't know finally. Good. This is the Fabian window, created by George Bernard Shaw in 1910. And you got the guy in a green coat and a red coat, and they're hammering on a world that's on fire on an anvil. And at the top it says, remold it near to the harsh desire. Remold what? The earth. Why are they remolding it? It's on fire. Look at the fire behind the guy in the red coat. It's just come out of a fire. What is that? That's a crisis. There's a crisis. It's a manufactured crisis. You can't let a good crisis go to waste. You create the crisis and you create the solution, which you would have never gotten the solution through if you hadn't had the crisis, because the people will not go where they want to go. The American people, the people of the world will not go where the globalists want to go without a stupendous crisis. So they create the crisis and then they remold it near to the harsh desire. You got all these Fabians down here praying to a stack of Fabian books. George Bernard Shaw is off on the far side clapping and mocking his Fabian friends who said, shh, let's do this quietly. He said, this is a great thing, let's talk about it. Another guy that said, let's talk about this, was a guy who wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope, Carroll Quigley. He discipled Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton gave a shout out to him at the Democratic Convention in the early 90s. Carroll Quigley, Tragedy and Hope was his book. There was an article, I think it was in the Washington Post, called The Professor Who Knew Too Much. And Carroll Quigley was writing all these books because he was given inside look at the various globalist organizations and their white papers, and he spilled his guts and wrote the book Tragedy and Hope and said, this is what we should be shouting from the rooftop instead of being quiet about it. George Bernard Shaw was the same way, so he said to be mocking his Fabian friends. And again, remember that out of the Fabian society came the Labor Party, Tony Blair's Labor Party. But notice they're banging on this hot earth and remolding it. But what's this logo above the globe? What is that logo? It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. They know they're using religion. They know what they're doing. Jesus warned us of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You'll know them by their fruit, their doctrinal fruit. There's Tony Blair, who unveiled the Fabian window after it was stolen in 1978 and then reappeared again. And he went on to praise the Fabian society and what they were doing. Here's Rick Warren on the cover of Time magazine. Has already said he's working with Tony Blair. And Rick Warren said of Tony Blair, I honestly don't know of anyone better suited for this challenge. It's why I agreed to serve on the advisory board. The Tony Blair Faith Foundation's potential for doing good is staggering. By the way, in his book, Purpose-Driven Life, Rick Warren goes on to praise George Bernard Shaw, Aldous Huxley, Bertrand Russell. But hey, John Piper tells you, hey, it's a great book. He goes on to quote no less than 9 mystics in his book, Purpose-Driven Life. There they are. But John Piper says, what's there to criticize? Do you know how many young people are being influenced by the likes of John Piper? Do you know how many pastors are being influenced by the likes of John Piper? By the way, you might take note, John Piper, Matt Chandler, David Platt, Tibeti, all these guys are out there preaching Black Lives Matter, white privilege. By the way, Black Lives Matter was started by 3 ladies that are open communists and proclaim themselves to be queer. Now, when I was a kid, we played a game called Smear the Queer. And that was politically incorrect. You remember that? If you use the word queer, your parents would say, right? Today, they're LGBTQ. Queer. It's a compliment now. You know, you should say that someone was butch. Boy, she's butch. What does that mean? Manly. Manly. She's butch. You don't say that. You do now. You know what they call them? Femme and butch. She's the feminine, she's the butch. They call themselves this, femme and butch. It's kind of like Jeff and Mutt. I can't keep up with it because we got all this political correctness, but then all of a sudden now we can say queer and butch. But I can't say Islam is a false world religion that's demonic, that Allah is Satan. But I can say queer and butch. I'm totally confused. But coming up in April, you've got all these guys that are pushing white privilege and they're pushing Black Lives Matter, which again is founded by 3 communist women, that one of them or 2 of them say they're open queers. And these neo-Calvinists are promoting Black Lives Matter, white privilege, Rick Warren, social justice. Many of them are promoting the whole immigration thing. Oh, we got to bring all, this is what Jesus would do. And then go look when they go speak it together for the gospel. Some of the other theologians who we have appreciated that show up to speak with them. Now, I don't understand why you got these conservative theologians that stand in their pulpit and preach against all this and then go and speak with these morons and are a bridge to their liberalism. I don't know what to call them. So I call them bridgers. You got these conservative evangelicals that have become bridgers. Now, I want to know why. You stand in your pulpit and you condemn all this and then you go speak with these morons.
Amen.
Why? All I can say is follow the money. You got 20,000 people showing up. What else could it be? When I go to the website and I find out if I want a corner bookstore, it's going to cost me $25,000 to buy a bookstore exhibit booth at that conference. I'm thinking there must be a lot of ka-ching going on. And you got a publisher who gives you advances and they want to see your book sell. And so the way you sell books is you show up at events where they charge $25,000 for a bookstore exhibit. So pretty soon the guys preaching against pragmatism are some of the most pragmatic guys behind the scene. But don't you dare bring that up.
Preach.
Or the good old boy club will come out for you and scalp you. And don't you dare bring up any of the neo-Calvinists that might come to your town in Memphis, Tennessee, where I live, and sit in an interfaith dialogue with a Jew-hating, Holocaust-denying, Hitler-defending, jihadi-preaching imam, which is what happened to us in June. Great steward of the faith, James White, came to our town. And he said in an interfaith dialogue with Yasser Qadi, Muslim Brotherhood, who has hundreds of thousands of followers, travels all over the globe doing fundraisers for groups that are known tied to terrorist organizations. We have this man on video saying that you can in jihad you can take the property of the Christian and the Jews. We have him on video saying the Jews today are not a real Semitic people. Look at their blonde hair and their crooked noses. The Holocaust is propaganda. Hitler really didn't mean to do that. He discipled the underwear bomber. I mean, what more do you need to know? But here comes James White. Comes to town, and we're going to have an interfaith dialogue. Not a debate, mind you, an interfaith dialogue. I've been tracking Yasser Qadi since 2010. It's 2017, James White comes to town, and we break the story on a national level. Oh, some of the neo-Calvinists say, well, House, he says he broke the story, but he really didn't. There are other bloggers talking about it. Okay, what we meant was we broke it nationally. But see, they don't want to argue with, hey, James White came to town and did an interfaith dialogue with a Jew-hating, Holocaust-denying, Hitler-defending jihadi. Let's talk about the fact that Brannon said he broke the story. Well, there was one blog over here talking about it. You see, what are they doing? They're not saying, oh, we agree with House. No, they're saying, let's do whatever we can to destroy House's credibility. But we did break the story on a national level. Nobody was talking about it on a national level until we brought it out. And we brought in a former Muslim, Sharam Hadian, and an Egyptian from Egypt, which is why he's an Egyptian, who speaks Arabic, And we did 4 one-hour TV shows on this. Took the clips, broke them down, where James White says at the beginning of the introduction, he says, you go see it on YouTube, this is an evening where we're going to discuss where we agree and where we disagree. And I sense a kindred spirit, he says to Yasser Qadhi. I sense a kindred spirit with you. And then he says, you're my mentor in part in this part of Islam. Why on earth would you want your mentor on Islam to be a Jew-hating, Holocaust-denying, Hitler-defending, jihadi preaching imam? And then he says on video, I would like for you to make a video to teach my community about true Islam. Oh yeah, that's what we want. A guy that can practice taqiyya, lying to the infidels, to produce a video to tell us what Islam is. So as soon as we bring this up, what happened? We started getting attacked. By who? The neo-Calvinists. Why? Because James White is one of their boys. Now, if Rick Warren had done this with Yasser Qadhi, they'd say, good for you, House. But you see, I had just touched the third rail of the Good Old Boy Club. One guy actually got on video and said, now, if Rick Warren did this, we wouldn't be so comfortable with that. But if one of the good guys, that's what he said, if one of the, quote, good guys does this, who preaches the doctrines of grace, i.e. Calvinism, we should give him a pass. That's on video. Do you see we have a problem? We not only are dealing with the neo-evangelicals, the globalists, the Fabian socialists, we're dealing with a compromise with an evangelicalism that is pragmatism. We will only go after the things that are vital to the church when it doesn't impact our club, our bottom line, our network. Yes, we will preach against all these horrible things, but then we'll run over here and speak at a conference to 20,000 with those very people promoting it, because why? I don't know why, other than I can figure out the old follow the money thing. And what happens as soon as you lift up a shout to warn the church? They start coming after you. Who's the they? The Marxists? The Muslims? No, the they is the religious industrial complex. You see, it's a religious Trojan horse. And what I'm finding out is some of the players of the Trojan horse we never thought would be players, they don't even know they're players. They don't even know they've been compromised. These were the stalwarts of the faith. You know what Vance Havner, I had the chance to hear Vance Havner speak when I was a kid. Woo! And, check my time. To 10, right?
Well, no.
To win.
We've got 10 minutes left.
10 minutes left?
But we need to do question answers now.
Okay, so let me wrap it up with this. Vance Havner said this: the devil's not fighting religion. He's too smart for that. He's producing a counterfeit Christianity so much like the real thing that good Christians are afraid to speak out against it. You know what else Vance said? Vance went on to say that many people will not oppose this for fear they are fighting against God. For fear they're fighting against God. We have a false religious system that has come inside our own camp. And whether it's John Piper or Tim Keller or Russell Moore or Al Mohler. Oh, by the way, Al Mohler. You see, I can talk about the Marxists and Muslims, the red-green axis, all day long, and they're bad, but they're not the great threat. The great threat is the people inside of the camp who are buying and distributing the poison. One guy said to me recently, House, aren't there enough guys outside the camp to shoot at without shooting at the guys inside the camp? To which I said, well, wouldn't the guys inside the camp be more dangerous than the guys outside the camp? That was my Bernie Sanders invitation there. Who, by the way, I think did the voiceover for Aardvark on Pink Panther, if you go look that up. It's just like Aardvark. Go look it up. It sounds just like it. So, that's what can't you just shoot to the guys outside the camp? Well, a Trojan horse, by its very nature, is the imminent threat, right? Clubcade cars, other things that are the imminent threat right here. We have all these internal threats. National security, religious, internal threats. But they want you talking about the things outside. Because that's uncomfortable. He names names. That's going to mess up our network. We work with him, who works with him, who works with him, and House is, I can't be seen with House. We can't interview House. We can't invite House. I mean, Tommy Ice is brave to invite me. So I close with this. We have a religious Trojan horse, and there are people who we know are the players, and then there are people who many of you don't even know are the players because they've been deceived. And you got guys like Al Mohler, who promoted for years Russell Moore right out of his own institution, called him the man from Issachar, and installed him where he is today, and gave the inaugural address. You have Al Mohler promoting and endorsing books like the Benedict option, which is nothing by Rod Dreher other than a praise of the Church of Rome. And then you got guys like Carl Truman from Westminster Theological Seminary endorsing it on the back cover. And you have Al Mohler writing articles that we need to put communist and terrorist Nelson Mandela on the side of the heroes. But Al Mohler sat there at a conference on the West Coast not too long ago and said, any of you folks that vote for Donald Trump, you're not real Christians, you're not real evangelicals, you probably don't even go to church. Wait a minute, if I vote for Donald Trump, I'm a bad Christian, but you can praise communist and terrorist Nelson Mandela? You see, we got a problem. We need people to have discernment, who quit looking at the personalities and look at the principles. Because we have a conflict that's come into the church, thesis and antithesis, idea opposite idea, and the change comes from the conflict. Tommy, ready?
Yes. I thought I was hearing Dave Hunt reincarnated there, but he used to come all the time. A few quick questions. We've only got a few minutes here.
Quick.
We had to finally turn the Energizer Bunny's battery off. Go ahead.
Two things really quick. I am associated with a certain Christian liberal arts college up north. Everything you said is true and worse. Regarding the second coming, I grabbed a graduate student once and I said, does anybody here, any professor, any student, ever talk about the second coming of Christ? Forget about pre, mid, post. And he screwed up his face and looked off into space for a minute and finally he said, no. So on this campus, we are overwhelmed with social justice, and I'm convinced that one of the reasons is because it partners well with post-millennial theology. It has similar goals. It looks like it. And if you get the right smooth-talking men, then it passes for Christianity, and it's got tremendous momentum up where I am right now. Second thing, once a month I have coffee with a former professor from Moody Bible Institute, my alma mater. He was the chair of the theology department. And he's written several books on angelology and demonology. And he's an expert on spiritual warfare. And when we were having coffee last year, he said something that I suspected, but I never heard anybody say because it sounds crazy. But he said there are men in evangelicalism who are pastors, writers, college presidents who are self-aware, practicing Satanists. And then he held up his hand and he said, don't ask me who they are, I'm not going to tell you who they are. He said, but I know based on what they say, how they act. He said, I've counseled hundreds of people since 1970, and that is the case. I grew up in a fundamentalism that advocated, sort of Bob Jones-style separatism, and I spent my middle years rebelling against that, challenging it and questioning it. And now that I'm almost 50 years old, I see that they were right.
Well, I can't speak to the Satanism part, but let me say, as far as we're hearing from sources that former Muslims who are now Christians, that are warning us that the imams are encouraging some of their Muslims to go into churches and pose as converts to Christianity so they can infiltrate the church with theological confusion. So they're Muslims, but they're practicing taqiyya, acting as though they're converts to Christianity, and then they bring in the confusion. And this doesn't help when you have guys like Rick Warren and Leif Anderson and Bill Hybels signing the Yale document, and Rick Warren signing the Yale document that Muslims and Christians all worship the same God. This is not helping
Yeah, that happened at Jack Hibbs Church out in California. A Muslim infiltrated their staff, and they didn't know it till the FBI showed up and told them.
See, there you go. And Andy Woods, he had somebody show up at his church and put the Quran in the gift bags that they give to visitors. Somebody made it onto the premises and put Qurans in the gift bags.
We got one back here. Go ahead.
This weekend, I heard something about an organization that's scarily getting big, that's after Trump. It's called OFA, if you know anything about it.
What's it called again?
OFA, Organization for America.
Oh, yeah, I think
Are
that's...
they getting as bad as they say?
Yeah, I think that's one of the groups that's connected to Barack Obama, one of the community organizing groups that's connected to Barack Obama. And by the way, a lot of these groups are the ones that are agitating on the street level, and George Soros, of course, is paying them, and George Soros has just moved $18 billion into this. Black Lives Matter, by the way, has now had $100 million pledged to them. And I'll tell you what they're going to go for. They're going for the impeachment of Donald Trump is what they're going for. And all of this, and they're going to throw Conyers under the bus, and I think he's going to retire today.
We just got to...
He just retired?
He's going to retire and give it to his son.
Of course, keeping the family.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Here you go.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Would you comment on the Illuminati and the power base and how they are truly controlling the wheels on what's going on in the world today?
The Illuminati is a term that was pretty much abandoned in the late 1700s. Today you would just call them globalists. And they don't need any secret handshakes or secret clubs. They all know each other. They're all very, very wealthy people. They don't even have to know each other. Again, because at the root of this is a demonic thing, so it's a spiritual thing. And they're really all committed and reading to the same books. They're reading Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey, a New Age occultist that had a demon known as the Tibetan. She wrote over 10,000 pages with. Robert Mueller, who rose after 40 years at the United Nations to be the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, added more divisions to the UN than anyone. Robert Mueller openly read her, promoted her. He promoted many other New Agers. He promoted the father of the New Age, Jesuit priest, Teilhard de Chardin. So Alice Bailey, she openly spoke about the Masons and these business groups and communities and how they would all merge together for the New Age, an age of enlightenment. And so they don't have to know each other. They're reading the same people. They're reading Teilhard de Chardin. They're reading Alice Bailey. They're reading the same books. So they don't have to be organized like many people say, secret handshakes and all. They don't have to do that. They openly know each other because they go to the same functions, the same receptions, the same conferences, just like we're here.
Well, thank you.